Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of poems about blacksmiths, and obviously the focus is on Hopkins's Felix Randal. But what I'd like to do is set up the background by showing you a couple of other poems, or at least one other poem, and referring to a third poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who wrote the poem The Village Blacksmith, and he described the village, the man as a mighty man with large and sinewy hands, and muscles of his brawny arms are strong as iron bands. But the lines that I want to bring up here relate to this poem because he says, and children coming home from school look in at the open door. They love to see the flaming forge and hear the bellows roar and catch the burning sparks that fly like chaff from a threshing floor. That image comes up in this poem, and it's almost also the background for the poem because Seamus Heaney tells us that as a child he passed by the blacksmith shop going and coming home from school, pretty much the same way that Longfellow says, and the children coming home from school looked in the open door, and they could see the sparks flying off the anvil like chaff on a threshing floor. So we see that in this particular poem as well. So I'll read the forge, do a little bit of an analysis of it, and then move on to Felix Randal because we are looking at Hopkins' poems, and I thought it'd be interesting to introduce that poem, Felix Randal, with this poem, The Forge. So this is the way the poem goes. All I know is a door into the dark. Outside, old axles and iron hoops rusting. Inside, the hammered anvil's short-pitched ring, the unpredictable fantail of sparks or hiss when a new shoe toughens in water. The anvil must be somewhere in the center, horned as a unicorn, at one end square, set there immovable, an altar where he expends himself in shape and music. Sometimes, leather-aproned, hairs in his nose, he leans out on the jamb, recalls a clatter of hoofs where traffic is flashing in rows, then grunts and goes in with a slam and a flick to beat real iron out, to work the bellows. Now I'll come back to this and read it again, but I'd like you to see the inside of a forge. This is actually my grandfather, Michael Halloran. He died in 1919, and he had a forge in Providence on Atwells Avenue. And the fellow on the left is his helper. I don't know his name, but this is my grandfather rather. As I said, he died in 1919. So this picture was probably taken somewhere around 1905 to probably 16 or something, because he was in poor health in the last year of his life. But notice on the floor all of the horseshoes, and then the wooden barrel where we hear the hissing coming from the sound of the hot metal, the white iron being cooled off and hardened in the water. And here's the anvil. See, like the unicorn, it comes out like a horn there. And this is the vise. I actually have that vise to this day. And in the back, it's an interesting picture. You see the calendar up there, over here. And then this is a newspaper advertising some kind of an event, and my grandfather's license as a blacksmith, and the brawny arms, muscular man. So you get a better picture of what we're talking about. All the barrels for the other, I guess, the used shoes that he throws in there. Okay, so we'll go back and look once again at Heaney's poem. And as a child, he never went inside the forge. He says, all I know is a door into the dark. So imagine a child, 9-year-old boy walking by and looking into the dark of the inside of the forge and not being able to make out the details within. So it would, carry some mystique and intrigue and, just, enough to capture a young child's imagination. And then outside, old axles and iron hoops rusting. Inside, the hammered anvil's short-pitched ring sound here. And the unpredictable fantail of sparks when, he hits the hot metal with his huge hammer. Or the hiss when a new shoe toughens in the water. The anvil must be somewhere in the center, he tells us, because he's never gone in. And horned as a unicorn, as we saw, at one end square. That would be the other end. And it's set there immovable. And we're told it's like an altar for the blacksmith to perform his service. An altar where he expends himself in shape and music. So you can hear, the ringing of the metal. He says it's like music. Sometimes, and then leather aproned. We have that here. See, my grandfather has a leather apron on, and you can see it just covers over his pants. You can see the continuation of his jeans. So leather aproned, hairs in his nose. This might apply more to Felix Randal poem. We have a better description of the blacksmith in that poem when we get to it. And he leans, so here's a break here. The boy is talking about what he sees or what he imagines is inside the stock forge, okay? And then now I think what we have here, because I think it's a kind of a sonnet, because we have 8 lines in the octave and 6 in the sestet, and there's a shift between the boy here and both the narrator, the poet, we had the voice of the poet, and also the blacksmith. He grunts and goes in with a slam and a flick. So here the poet's talking, though, saying about he, the blacksmith. He sets up an altar where he expends himself in shape and music. So, there's different points of view. The boy, poet, and the blacksmith, where he expends himself in shape and music. Sometimes leather aproned, hairs in his nose, he leans out on the jamb, recalls, now this is an interesting line, recalls a clatter of hoofs where traffic is now flashing in rows, the sun's flashing off the metal, and then on the narrow sidewalks of Ireland, like down around Kerry, you see the cars parked in rows along the curbstone, and with the sun flashing off them in rows. And now we're back to the blacksmith again. He looks out, right? He leans on the jamb here, thinking to himself of the old days when horses were going by. Now, the modern world is flashing of automobiles, okay, and traffic passing as well. Then he grunts and he goes in, back to his work, with a slam and a flick. I don't think there's much that you can, get out of that. I wouldn't say that means he's angry, slamming something, but he's back to his work. To beat real iron out, to work the bellows. This word grunt, though, I'll look at that. We'll talk about that. So he comes back and he beats the real iron out. So he's suggesting real iron as opposed to the cheap iron, maybe from China, and the imported cars. That might be stretching it, but you could look at it that way too. And he works his bellows. So it's a nice description there. I don't see the bellows there. I'm sure they're there somewhere if you look closely. But the wooden bucket of water, that's what Longfellow referred to in his poem, talking about the boy going by, looking in, seeing the bucket of water, wooden bucket, he says. Okay, so let's look at my analysis. As a child in the north of Ireland, Seamus Heaney would pass a blacksmith's forge on his way to and from school each day. He states that he had never entered the forge as a child, but based on his knowledge of the numerous forges throughout Ireland, he paints a picture of the hometown forge in this poem. Later in his life, he becomes good friends with the blacksmith he describes in this poem. The poem is a tribute to him and to all blacksmiths, including my grandfather. The poem also alludes to the changes in the culture of Ireland, which has emerged from an agrarian society to join the rest of the 21st century in the growth of modern technology. Slowly, the old ways are passing from the land. So that might be suggested in the grunt, I don't know. His opening line describes the scene as a child might experience it. A door in the dark. What mystery and strange intrigue that image must have conjured in the mind of a child. Perhaps he felt the wave of heat coming out of the forge as he passed in a cold winter morning. Like the child, we too respond to the imagery of sights and sounds Heaney presents to us. Rusting old axles, iron hoops are lying about in disarray. We hear the ring of the hammer on the anvil and the hiss of the white-hot metal being dipped into the wooden water barrel. Within the darkened room, we catch the occasional flare of sparks as the heated metal is hit by the blacksmith's large hammer. The element of darkness and mystery within is sustained as the child states that the anvil must be somewhere in the center of the room. He's not sure, so he's trying to figure it out in his head. He has never ventured inside, but he has knowledge of what an anvil should look like, and he associates that with, as a child might, to that of a unicorn with the horn protruding from its head. Very appropriate image. So the structure of the poem, I say a sonnet, but it doesn't have the rhyming scheme, so I might be wrong on that. But it does have the octave and sestet in terms of a division, the turn in second part. In the octave, we have the thoughts and description of a child. In the sestet, the focus shifts to that of the blacksmith in both his physical description and his thoughts. The poet offers an adult perspective of the blacksmith by suggesting an analogy of his conducting a service at an immovable altar, complete with the music and movements. And this is the line where he expends himself in shape and music. His work is a celebration of life and service. His calling. He's a blacksmith to serve others, for he has been ordained to pursue this trade. The last few lines of the sestet give us our first impression of his features. With just a few details, we imagine a man who appears to be coming up for air before resuming his work after having taken a short break to look outside at the modern world, the stoop. That's what we were told. He went over to the stoop, put his elbows on it, looked out, or maybe he went outside. Through a few poignant details, we enter into the blacksmith's mind here as he recalls the clatter of hoofs. His outside world now is filled with automobiles where traffic is flashing in rows. No longer does one hear the clatter of hoofs. We are told that he grunts and goes in. Now, that might suggest a mild form of dismay. Times have changed. Probably longing for the good old days when there were more horses around, too, more work. For we are then told his return is accompanied by a slam and a flick to beat real iron out, perhaps suggesting a contrast between his work and the poor grade materials found in the imported modern cars. The theme, then, might be a statement on the changes which come to the old country in the form of the modern technology. Okay, so that's Seamus Heaney's poem, and let's read it one more time with that information. All I know is a door into the dark. Outside, old axles and iron hoops rusting. Inside, the hammered anvil's short-pitched ring. The unpredictable fantail of sparks of hiss when a new shoe toughens in water. The anvil must be somewhere in the center, horned as a unicorn, at one end square, set there immovable, an altar where he expends himself in shape and music. Sometimes, leather-aproned, hairs in his nose, he leans out on the jamb, recalls the clatter of hoofs where traffic is flashing in rows, grunts, goes back in with a slam and a flick to beat real iron out, to work the bellows, and life goes on. Okay, his day continues. So there's another look at it. Okay. I actually blew this up to see what the date was on that calendar one time. Don't ask me what it is. I can't remember. Okay, so that's that poem. Now we move on to Hopkins. And you know that Hopkins' work is, sacramental, holy. There's always a message, spiritual message behind each of his works. In this poem, he's speaking as a priest, as an observer, observing what he sees and hears. The poem begins with his having overheard in conversation. It wasn't like directed to him. He overheard somebody mentioning that this man, Felix Randal, a blacksmith, had died. And this is the way it begins. Felix Randal, the farrier. Oh, he is dead then. My duty all ended, who have watched his mold of man, big-boned and haughty, handsome, pining, till time when reason rambled in it, and some fatal four disorders fleshed there, all contended. Sickness broke him. Impatient, he cursed at first, but mended, being anointed and all. Though a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tendered to him. Ah, well, God rest him all road ever he offended. This, seeing the sick, endears them to us. Us, too, it endears. My tongue had taught thee comfort. Touch had quenched thy tears that touched my heart, child Felix, poor Felix Randal. How far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years, when thou art at the random grim forge, powerful amidst peers, didst fettle for the grey horse, the great grey dray horse, his bright and battering sandal. All right, so with any poem by Hopkins, you kind of have to read it first to get some idea of what he's about with a small degree of understanding, obviously. But then we go back and look closely. We'll tear it apart and then come up with what he's doing in his poem. So first of all, it's a sonnet, and the first 8 lines talk about Hopkins himself, the priest, hearing about his dear friend Felix Randal, who has died. The farrier is another word for a blacksmith, by the way. And, he kind of processes that in his mind. And then first of all, we're told, he pined and pined till time eventually, did its work on him. And 4 fatal disorders fleshed there, all contended together to bring him down. And from the powerful man, he was down here, powerful amidst peers. So that opening line, quatrain, describes Felix Randal and how the illness eventually got to him and he died. Okay. Now we talk about Felix himself and how he dealt with his illness. Sickness broke him at first, okay? In other words, when he came down with this illness, here's a robust man doing a hard day's work every day of his life, surrounded by people in the town that knew him well and saw him as a giant of a man. Nothing could bring him down. Sickness broke him, though, when he found out that he had an incurable disease. So at first, he was impatient with it. Okay, he fought it. I can't be dealing with this. I'm too strong to, have this illness. He cursed at first. Okay, but eventually he mended, being anointed. So remember, he's the priest here. My duty ended now with his death. But what was his duty? Attending to him over his period of illness, And then when I anointed him and all, he mended somewhat. Okay, he got used to the fact that he had the sacrament of the sick. Okay, and it was realism now. He realized that he wasn't going to make it. Though a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tended to him. So that would be what we might call the last rites, and giving him the Holy Eucharist in communion. I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tended to him. And then he, dealt with his illness and accepted it. Okay? And then this line here, it's in rather kind of an unusual line. He throws it out, oh, well, God rest him. All roads ever reoffended. That's a colloquial expression in Scotland or Wales, God rest him, all road ever reoffended, We don't use that expression, but you get the gist of it. God forgive him any of his offenses that for those whom he might have offended in his lifetime, kind of thing, right? So that's the octave. And remember, in the sestet, we're going to be looking for something different. So he says, this business of seeing the sick, not Felix, but any sick, endears them to us. We become closer to them in our emotions. We feel for their sickness, for their health, for their journey. Us too, it endears. Us to the sick. In other words, it's a reciprocal thing. They are endeared to us, and we are more closely endeared to them in their sickness. My tongue had taught thee. Now he's talking to Felix, okay? My tongue had taught thee comfort, and in my touch had quenched your tears at times. And your tears touched my heart, child Felix, poor Felix Randal. So, that's an endearing line there. You can feel Hopkins' compassion and love for this big man who probably had tears in his eyes. Your tears touched my heart, and he calls him a child because he was like a child. Now, no longer that big, robust man that everybody admired, a man of brawn. And in the last three lines of the sestet, he's now entering into the thoughts of Felix, saying this. He says, I wonder, how you in your youth never saw that this is how things were going to come to an end for you. How far from your thoughts then, when you were, strong and young, how, remote this image of your dissipation would be, all thy more boisterous years, when you at the random grim forge, powerful amidst peers, your friends came in and probably talked with you as you worked at the forge, admiring your powerful physique, powerful amidst peers. And when you did fettle the great gray dray horse, the big, workhorse, you mastered him in order to put his shoes on. Here you are, that big man, leaning against the horse, lifting up his hoof and hammering a sandal here, that would be the horseshoe, and his bright and battering sandal on him. So how far from your thoughts at that time when you were doing those things would this image ever have come into your thoughts? So it's an image of, a man who has weakened with illness and eventually died. And so there's a lot of, introspection here, both on the part of Hopkins himself as a priest, and on the part of Felix Randal, this big, brawny man who was powerful and succumbed to his illness. Okay, so the farrier is the horseshoe. Okay, so blacksmith. So I'll read it again now with those thoughts in mind, and my analysis follows pretty much what I just said. Felix Randal, the farrier. Oh, he's dead then? Oh, I didn't know that. My duty all ended. No more I have to attend to him anymore. Who have watched his mold a man, big-boned and hardy, handsome, pining, till time when reason rambled it in it, and some fatal disorders fleshed there, all contended. Sickness broke him. Impatient he cursed at first, but mended, being anointed and all. Though a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tended to him. Ah, well, God rest him, all road ever he offended. This seeing the sick endears them to us too it endears. My tongue had taught thee comfort, touch had quenched thy tears, and your tears had touched my heart, child, poor Felix Randal. How far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years, when thou at the ransom grim forge, powerful amidst peers, did fettle for the great gray dray horse his bright and battering sandal. All right, so let's look through the little analysis I put together. The sonnet is a literary cameo of a man whom Hopkins attended to during a period of sickness and eventual death, describing his physical and his personal characteristics while depicting the man's struggle and gradual acceptance of death. Humanly touching, it evokes a sympathetic mood through its sensory details. The poem begins with Hopkins, the narrator, commenting on Felix's passing in a manner as if he had just heard it from others in conversation, not necessarily of his having been told the news directly. He introduces the narrative in a casual manner with the words, "Oh, is he dead then?" Then, thinking at first of his own past relationship, he says, "All right, my duty is all ended." Okay, that would be of offering counsel and the sacraments. The second part of the quatrain then goes on to provide Felix's physical features and his gradual dissipation. A big, strong man in decline being consumed by 4 unspecified diseases eating at his body and mind as well, till time when reason rambled in it. He kind of was like not making sense, in his conversation. So that's why I indicate his mind as well. The second quatrain describes the way his illness took a psychological toll on the blacksmith. All his life he had been in control over big workhorses, but now he faced a battle over which he had no power. Sickness broke his spirit at first, but then the narrator, as priest, says that those spirits mended after he was given the sacraments of reconciliation, the Eucharist, and the anointing of the sick, sacrament of the sick. These are referred to as sweet reprieve and ransom. Reflecting on that, the narrator sighs, "Oh well, God be with poor old Felix," lending a homespun tone to both the narrator and his friend. The sestet then leads the narrator's thoughts to a generalization regarding the relationship anyone develops while tending to another during a period of sickness. He reflects with deep affection. Seeing the sick endears them to us, and us to it endears, implying that such bonding is symbiotic. Touch had quenched thy tears, and thy tears had touched my heart, child Felix. The closing lines of the sestet reveal the narrator musing on the seemingly incongruity of Felix's ordeal. He thinks aloud how Felix, back in the days of his prime, never in a million years would have given thought to this kind of journey's end, after having been so hardy and robust all his life. How far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years. As a big man with rippling muscles, powerful amidst peers, he wrangled with difficult workhorses and fastened the iron shoes to their feet. Didst fettle for the great gray dray horse his bright and battering sandal. As a poet, Hopkins presents a wonderful description of a man from a working class of Liverpool. As a priest, he managed to heal Felix's heart, and Felix managed to touch Hopkins' heart. He achieves this tribute while adhering to the structure of the perfect Petrarchan sonnet. And just a note at the end here. My grandfather, he died of kidney ailment and had a gradual decline in the same way as Felix Randal. So there's some similarity there. But you can take a closer look at that picture as I close.